Hey, so what I wanted to do in this pretty long video is go through a bunch of the elements that make up Neil Young's sound, from what he's doing with his right hand and the strumming technique to some of his ways of proceeding in solos, a little bit about how he uses the tremolo bar, a bit about his just general philosophical approach to the instrument. He's got so many songs, cranked out so many albums and great tunes over the decades. And of course, it's going to be hard to summarize and capture everything, but I think there are some key things that we can focus on. First thing I just mentioned by way of passing before we go into some of the technique is his actual sound that he produces. Believe it or not, he doesn't actually use a distortion pedal. He's got a particular 1959 Fender Deluxe, I believe, that he's held on to for decades. That one particular amp, very small amp that he's just got pushing to the max, is really what's responsible for the distorted sound. He's got fans blowing on it to keep it cool because he's got some extra retrofitted tubes in it. But that's essentially the heart of his sound, is just that amp pushed to its limits. If you ever see him in concert, he's got this big red box that he calls the Whizzer. And when he steps on it, one of the things it does is it essentially just mechanically changes the volume on the Fender amp, which is responsible for whether the sound is really distorted or only moderately so or not distorted at all. He's got some other pedals in there as well. He's got some delay, and he's got a reverb that he uses, but the pedals, the delay pedal, and some of the other stuff he's got in there are really for when he's just pulling out all the stops and making use of feedback and just generating lots of noise. But the basic sound is just the amp pushed to its limits and this reverb that he's got, this whole reverb unit, which he actually forces every place that he plays to drill a hole in the stage so that he can put the pan for the reverb on the concrete floor underneath so it won't vibrate at all. All right, so pretty simple approach, but lots of interesting stuff going on in his playing. So let me try to dissect some of the pieces. So the first thing I thought I'd actually talk about is something that people usually don't focus on, which is really what the right hand is doing. Usually people just focus on, what notes need to be fretted and how to fret the chords and what the scales look like. When you're really trying to capture somebody's sound, I think it's really important to focus on what the right hand is doing. Everybody finds their own natural way of doing it, but when you're trying to pick up a particular player's sound, it really pays off to see if you can get some videos. Nowadays it's easy to find tons of videos and watch what somebody's right hand is doing. Because it's there that you get some subtleties. You get things like the angle of attack of the pick and what strings are being emphasized and what the emphasis is on the downstrokes versus the upstrokes. And you get a sense as well as how strings get muted by the right hand. The strings often are muted by both the left and the right. And I think it's important to get Neil Young's sound is to really focus on what his right hand is doing, because it's kind of unusual. He's got really long arms, but if you notice, what he does is he almost always does most of his strumming completely from the wrist. There's very little, from the elbow. There's very little wrist action that's actually happening. It's almost all done by the elbow with a lot of emphasis on the high strings and a kind of percussive effect that he gets. So let me run through a couple of songs. First on the acoustic and then on the electric. And you can see how he's basically using the same strumming technique no matter whether he's using acoustic or electric. So I'll run through the song Out on the Weekend from the Harvest album, then do a little Pocahontas, and then two electric songs, Cortez and Hurricane. And as always, for these songs you can find tabs easily online. A great site to find basically everything all in one place is called HyperRust. The website is, It's hyperrust.org. Basically you find everything that Neil Young has got all in one place. So let me go ahead and focus on some of the stuff that he's doing in the right hand, and then we'll come back and look at some scales and some stuff that he does with the left hand, and then we'll come back to the right hand to see how he makes use of the tremolo bar, because that's another important part of his sound. Now, when it comes to Neil Young's soloing, he often gets a bit of grief. He's not known as a great lead player, but I think there's really interesting stuff that he does. People use words like heartfelt and all feel, and there's certainly something to that. He himself claims that he doesn't even know scales. He just reaches for the notes that feel like they're going to work for him. And as he often says, is he's extremely tolerant of bad notes, probably more tolerant of dissonance and bad notes than any guitarist in rock music, and often will make use of bad notes he hits to interesting effect, as I'll get to a little bit later. But when you try to reconstruct some of his solos, I do think you can find certain themes that he goes to. Of course, he's got so many songs that you can't have one template for all of them, but there are some certain themes. Very often he's comfortable in minor modes, one way or another, minor keys. A song like Cortez the Killer is really pretty straightforward, just a full E minor scale. One of his most favorite kinds of scales, I think, though, it's somewhere between a minor pentatonic and a full minor scale. So a minor pentatonic would have, so let's just do it in A. A, C, D, E, G, A. So you got the 1, the flat 3, the 4, the 5, the flat 7th, and then the octave. Very often, Neil Young solos will start on the flat 7th and move up to the octave. So that's something to look for, is starting a step below. He almost never uses the regular 7th. He almost always uses the flat 7th. And I'll go through some examples and show you. But I think that you can use what I'll call the Neil Young scale. As I said, a mix between a minor pentatonic and a full minor scale. And that's essentially, instead of just going from the 1 to the flat 3, he throws in the 2 as well. And very often we'll get a flat 7th to the 1 to the 2. And one of the reasons he really likes to use the 2 is so that he can use that half step, that half interval between the 2 and the flat 3. And in fact, through lots and lots of songs, regardless of what key they're in, you'll actually hear him using that little B to C connection. So if we did the full thing, it would be A, B, C, D, E, G, A, B, there's our 2 again, C. And that little hammer on or pull off that he can do between the B and the C, and then completing it either with the G or back to the octave or to the E, is something that we'll see in a number of different songs. So just continuing at what I'm calling the Neil Young scale with the extra 2 thrown in. So the B's that we're adding here, a B here, and a B here. We'll do the same thing, because A minor is one of the scales he prefers. D minor is another one as well, with the same adding the 2. And in this case, the 2 is going to be the E. And we'll go through some examples and show you that. And the final one that he often uses is an E minor, or E minor pentatonic, or that version that's got the 2 in it as well, where in this case we'll throw in the F sharp in addition to the G. Alright, so let me run through some examples and show you that. So as I said, let me go through a couple of places where he makes use of the B as well as the C. So what I was saying is the 2 and the flat 3. One song that I really like, kind of an obscure song from Zuma, called Dangerbird. The chord progressions of the verses and what the soloing is done over is just an F, G, A7. From the F to the G to the A7, when he's getting to the G, he starts on the G at flat 7th, moves it up to the A, gets the C and the B in there, back to the G, and then when he gets up to the A7th, he moves it up to the E, which is the fifth of the A chord. So there's one place where he's using it. Often he'll make use of open chords, and he'll do similar types of licks in the open position. So if you think about You Are Like a Hurricane. So in Like a Hurricane, he's going to make use of similar pull-off between the B and the C. I think the solo often starts up in in E. So there's another place you can do that. When you get to Cortez, the Killer, the song is really in E minor, and the soloing is based around the E minor scale. He also gets that B and C in there as well. So let's see. Often he'll start on, as I mentioned, he'll start on the flat seventh. B and the C in there. So then if we look at a song like Southern Man, based around the D minor, the solo comes in again on that flat seventh, so coming on the C. Using that flat seventh now in the D up here. Here we're making use of the E so that we can get that little half step between the E and the F. So another song that's worth taking a look at is Ohio, and it's a full Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young song. But I think you can get some interesting insight as well to the similar points that I was making before. So the chords that the riff that Neil Young plays is based off of a D minor, F, and C. But what he does is, he does this little hammer-on off the partial D minor. And what I think is noteworthy there, so we do the little lick off of the D minor, and then the next chord is an F. But what he does is, he hits the F note, and then the next note he hits is a G. So we get that moving from the 1 to the 2. And then the next chord is a C, and what do we get? We get C, D as the notes. So again, he's making use of the 2, this time in the little lick progression off of the chorus. And then the final thing that I think's interesting is that though I think the lead in that song was really played by Stephen Stills, Stills and Young had a long career. You know, they played back in Buffalo, Springfield together. They certainly knew each other's playing extremely well. The solo that Stills does, it's got a characteristic Stephen Stills kind of fast that he likes to do throughout lots of songs, such as Just a Song Before I Go and Wooden Ships. But what he does is he's using a D minor pentatonic, but he also throws in the E, just like we were talking about before in Southern Man. So without the E, the solo would sound like... and it would be missing something. But when he throws in the E, which is, again, the 2, we get the solo as it really sounds, and we also get that characteristic Neil Young flavor. So it's almost as if Stills is taking to heart Neil Young's playing and incorporating it in the chord work that Neil Young had done. So there's the E. Places where we see the minor pentatonic at work with the extra 2 thrown in so that we can really make use of that little step between the 2 and the flat 3. And the final piece of the Neil Young sound that I want to cover is the way he makes use of the tremolo bar. I don't have the Bigsby setup that he does. His is a bit tighter, so we can really get a lot of movement off of each note, whereas the one I've got to put a lot more pressure on it. But essentially, he just holds it in his hand while he's soloing and manages to get some work of the tremolo into almost every note, and that kind of wavering sound that's constantly moving in and out of tune is something that he really likes and is happy with. As I mentioned, that kind of dissonance that goes with it. And it takes practice to be able to be thinking about what you're doing with your left hand and then also getting the right strings hit with your right hand while you're also working on the tremolo. So it's something worth practicing if you want to try to get his sound. Place where you can keep in mind, as I mentioned before, his welcoming dissonance. You know, inevitably, if you're taking risks when you're soloing, you're gonna miss notes. Well, in keeping with the Neil Young style, basically just go with it. You hit a wrong note, act like it's the note you intended. Some extra bends into it, get the tremolo working, just get a bit of noise, and essentially take it to heart what I think is really driving spirit of his music is. Take the instrument for what it is. When you're playing an acoustic, you get a different kind of sound out of it. You're capable of getting some sweet melodies and some nice, interesting combinations of tones and harmonics. When you got the electric instrument out, make use of it as an electric instrument. Crank up the distortion, get the feedback going, really make use of it as an electrified instrument, and really bring out what makes it different from an acoustic. It's not just an instrument that's louder than acoustic, it's a completely different beast, and I think that's one of the things that he really takes to heart, and he treats it like a completely different beast. So don't be shy, reach for the notes, take some risks, and don't be afraid of hitting bad notes and getting some dissonance. And as I said, in fact, welcome it into your playing as just a way of kind of celebrating what the electric guitar really is all about. All right, so I hope all of that was of some use. Take it easy.